Hello and welcome everyone to the latest mega review, where we don't just review the movie, but everything that went into making the movie what it was. Today we're going to talk about The Amazing Spider-Man, the much too soon reboot of the Spider-Man franchise because Sam Raimi was driven out of the franchise by all of those idiot Sony executives. But you know what? This is an interesting kind of case, this movie, because I think a lot of the hate that people have for this movie now is actually splashback from the second Amazing Spider-Man movie, because when you take this movie on its own, and even some of the decisions that we all criticize can actually kind of be understood when you look at this movie in the overall context of where the franchise was at the time. But when this movie came out, the initial reaction was not overwhelming hate, it was more just a feeling of
better luck next time?
Oh no.
Exactly! The major criticisms that most people had was that the reboot was too soon, which I think most of us agree with, and a lot of people didn't like the dark and brooding tone. It certainly is a drastic tone shift from the Sam Raimi movies, so a shift in tone that quick, that fast, usually doesn't go over too well. But when you take into account that the young kids who got into Spider-Man from the Sam Raimi movies, at the time that this movie came out, they would have been teenagers, would have been a bit older, would have been more mature, would have been open to a more darker, more realistic, more mature kind of storyline. So in that regard, the darker tone does make sense. Because if you do want to maintain your audience, if you do want to maintain your fan base, you do need to mature with them. The Harry Potter movies did this, the comic books themselves do this. But of course, this movie did not start out as The Amazing Spider-Man, it started out as Spider-Man 4. Yes, back when Sam Raimi was still tentatively on board. At the time he sat down to begin work on Spider-Man 4, he was very, very unhappy with how Spider-Man 3 came out. He was really hoping he could fix that, iron out some of the issues in this movie, but unfortunately the endless interfering from Sony once again sabotaged his efforts to try to make a good movie, and he eventually became so fed up with it that he left. But not before Spider-Man 4 went through some serious pre-production. They renegotiated contracts with Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. Each of them were reported to receive about $30 million each for a 3-picture deal. It would have been a whole new deal for a whole new trilogy. Imagine that if they all made 6 movies together. We might have even seen Peter and MJ get married. Maybe even pump out a couple of kids. You never know what could happen in the Sam Raimi universe. And there were many, many different versions of the scripts. In fact, that was one of the reasons why Sam Raimi left. He was sick of this constant changing of the script all the time. But they were going to continue with their previous plans of having Vulture in the movie with Ben Kingsley playing him. They then had to switch it to John Malkovich because of scheduling conflicts. They were even going to have the character of Felicia Hardy, who later becomes Black Cat, played by none other than Anne Hathaway. Isn't it amazing that she then goes on to play Catwoman when she was going to play Black Cat here? It's kind of this weird 6 degrees of separation. Sam Raimi had been building towards a Dr. Kirk Connors for a very long time, but then when Sony said they wanted to throw in 2 new characters, Sam Raimi had finally had enough and said, no, I'm out. So with Raimi gone and the price tag rising of all these pre-production costs, Sony just decided to hit the reset button only a few years after Spider-Man 3. And well, we know how it turned out from there. Before filming, the actor playing Kirk Connors actually researched his role by meeting several different handicapped people who had missing limbs, and he spent about a month performing like daily activities just like they would, using only one hand, which even included being able to tie his tie with just one hand, mainly because there was a scene where he does that in the movie, but then they chopped it out, making all of that hard work from him to learn that a total waste. But I guess that's the business. Believe it or not, a lot of these stunts are actually done with wire work. It's weird, a lot of them still do look very CGI and bouncy, but apparently no, as much stuff that could be done live was done live, because they wanted to stay with that more realistic tone for these new movies. When Peter is actually searching online for the name of his father, Richard Parker, one of the options that comes up is Richard Parker Life of Pi. This is a nod towards the fact that the Life of Pi actor plays the role of one of the Oscorp goons in this. And apparently Andrew Garfield, during his breaks in filming this, he would go out into New York still wearing his Spider-Man outfit and play basketball with some of the local kids. That's pretty cool. But as I said in my opening, I think a lot of the hate that this movie gets is not entirely justified. I mean, there's certainly things that are justified, and yeah, don't worry, we definitely will get to that. But we gotta give credit where credit is due to some of the good things. I, for one, actually like the new take on how Spider-Man lets the robber go. That the clerk in the convenience store is being a jerk to him because he's like 1 cent or something short on paying for his stuff. So then the robber throws him his drink. I really like when Peter gets into an argument with Detective Stacy about how Spider-Man's interference in capturing the car thief actually messed up like an ongoing investigation to try to figure out this larger crime syndicate that was robbing cars all over the city. I like that. It sort of shows that there is a bigger picture out there that Spider-Man couldn't see because he's just so focused on getting revenge for his uncle. I always thought it might have been better if they had said that the guy that Spider-Man had attacked was actually an undercover police officer who was trying to get into this gang of car thieves as well. That really could have driven at home. Spider-Man needs to be careful. Things aren't always as they seem. In the scene where he saves the kid from the car falling off the bridge, I really like the way he interacts with that kid, how Spider-Man gives him the mask, and then when the kid's too scared to climb out, he tells him to put it on, it will make him strong. I really like that. That's very superhero-like, but without being totally cheesy, and that's a difficult balance to get. And the same can be said for the fact that this kid's father then later on gets all his construction mates to line up all these cranes so that Spider-Man can swing in to defeat the lizard. Again, that's a scene that could have very easily been cheesy or cliched, kind of like the scenes like that in the Sam Raimi ones, but in this one was very well done, and it's, even though it is a bit unrealistic, it felt believable. I thought it was really cool that Spider-Man slings out a web all throughout the sewer. It's amazing that we haven't seen Spider-Man actually use a web in that manner before, of trying to actually catch some prey. We've seen Spider-Man use a lot of webs to like catch cars or falling objects or things like that, but never really in what its direct role as a spider's web is supposed to be. It was cool to see. And I also really like the new Spider-Man theme that they have in this music. It's inspirational, it's swelling, it's inspiring. And it really does get you into it during those web swinging scenes. Okay, let's get into the not so positive stuff about this movie. While many people do like the mechanical web shooters, and they certainly are more comic book accurate, I actually preferred the bio web shooters that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man had, where it was just in his wrist, he'd just shoot it out of his wrist. For some reason, I actually find that easier to believe than I do that Peter Parker would be able to build these sophisticated machines. I mean, I know he's smart, but how many kids are that smart that they could build technology like that? I mean, there's probably a couple of kids in the world out there that are that smart, but they're the kind of kids that have like already graduated university at the age of 12, and Peter Parker's still in high school, so I always found that just a little bit far-fetched.
Peter, what are you doing up there?
Oh, don't mind me. I'm just being really edgy and cool, you know? I'm just sitting up here on the roof, just showing how unique and eccentric, what an eccentric genius I am. Doesn't it just blow your mind that I'm doing this really cool, unique thing? Look how special I am. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why this annoys me so much. It just really does. It just screams, look at me, look at me. Yeah, just do your homework on your desk, you bloody show-off.
Garbage day! Huh? No!
We do get to see a little bit more of him actually putting his suit together and designing it, which is something that we see him just sort of building it a bit more piece by piece. And granted, the idea of why he wears a mask is kind of dumb, you know. He's fighting all these bad guys and then he just happens to fall through the roof, and he just happens to fall right into the wrestling ring and just happens to see the Spider-Man mask as the wrestling mask on the wall at a moment where the bad guys just happen to shout out after him, "We know what you look like." Yeah, it's kind of dumb, but come on, it was dumb before. But one thing that I absolutely hate about this Peter Parker, despise about him, not just in this movie, but especially in the next one, he's a total a-hole to Aunt May. The way he treats Aunt May is really awful in this, and it's not so much something that he does, it's what he doesn't do, which is after Uncle Ben gets shot, he just shows no concern whatsoever for how his Aunt May is feeling out of all this. And I mean, he's just running around doing his Spider-Man stuff. You need at least one one scene of him like comforting his aunt, being there for her, helping her, but he's not. He's consistently like still forgetting to like bring the eggs and stuff like this. Look, I understand that Spider-Man's dealing with it himself, but come on, Peter Parker, no matter how much trouble he'd go through, he would always be there for Aunt May. Always. It just seems out of character for me that he'd be so self-centered and so selfish that he wouldn't take more time to make sure she's okay. Just makes him very unlikable to me.
And he goes to Kurt Connors, who is the lizard.
Yep.
Who he knows has been working with lizards.
Right.
And regrowing
Smallville
lids.
syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, excuse me, Dr. Connors. And the doctor turns around and he's kind of thinning on one side of his hair and he's got like scales down his neck. And he's like, "Ah!" Like he's like that. And he's like, could you tell me how to kill a giant lizard?
Right.
And he's like, why do you want to know about lizards? Lizards are they're the greatest. Ah! And Peter Parker's like,
I wish I was a lizard. I am a lizard.
And Peter Parker's like, okay, that's interesting. All right, makes sense. And then Connors leaves.
Uh-huh.
And then you think, I thought when I saw this, oh, he's tweaked.
Yeah.
Because he's just playing along.
Right.
But then he looks down and he sees a rat that he was experimenting on, or a mouse, and he sees that it's turned into a half lizard, half rat. And then you see him go, oh my god. And not like the penny dropped. Why did it take that point the penny dropped?
So
You're supposed to be smart, Peter Parker!
Rant over?
Yes.
Exactly. And you know what else about this scene? This scene is like laced with Dr. Connors giving these kind of veiled threats to Peter Parker.
Did you know there's a rumor of a new species in New York? Beautiful and quite large.
What do you know about it? You seen it?
No, it's not yet classified. But it can be aggressive. If threatened.
But he doesn't even know he's Spider-Man. It makes no sense him talking like that to Peter Parker unless he knows he's Spider-Man, and he doesn't know that at this point in the movie. The very next time, about 10 minutes later in the movie, when they do fight each other again, he does discover his secret identity through that insanely idiotic way of him having property of Peter Parker on the back of his camera. Like, come on, really? Really? Why would you have that on your camera, especially when you know you're going to fight the lizard? Just, that's a whole other thing, but if this scene had happened after that scene, where the lizard knows he's Spider-Man, then all of this would make sense.
This man has worked for his whole life on cross-species genetics. He lost one arm, and he's been trying to grow it back, but there was something imbalanced about the equation, and he has turned into a full lizard. He's using lizard DNA. He is dangerous. And he's planning something horrific. I know.
Okay. All right, I get it. Here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna go back to hanging out with the citizens of Tokyo, and I'm gonna go back to protecting the citizens of this fine, fair city of ours. Sergeant Butler, would you please escort Mr. Parker back to school?
You know what, dude? Why don't you just go and talk to any of the 200 people that were on the bridge that all saw the lizard? Why don't you just talk to any of them? Apparently, plenty of people saw that Spider-Man was involved, but you expect me to believe that nobody saw this giant 8-foot-tall lizard flipping cars over the edge of the bridge like it was nothing? Nobody saw that? How about you try a little actual police work?
Give me everything we have on Dr. Curtis Connors, okay, right away?
Oh, good. So you are being a good police officer. Okay, so this is going to lead to absolutely nothing. Great, thanks a lot. And also, apparently the lizard has like Ant-Man style telepathic control of these lizards because Spider-Man figures out that he's hiding out in the sewers because he sees all these lizards working their way down towards him. Oh wait, no there isn't, because that's never brought up again in the movie whatsoever. Huh. Wow, Spider-Man, really lucky coincidence those lizards were heading towards Dr. Connors, because if they'd been heading towards like some other sewerage pipe, you could have ended up in a real mess. I'm not gonna lie though, this Gwen Stacy is much better than the Gwen Stacy we got in Spider-Man 3. Much, much better. She actually has character. She's actually charming. The other Gwen was just kind of like a mannequin that got passed around and then swapped from one boyfriend to another completely off screen. I guess that's how unimportant she was. But this Gwen Stacy, I actually like. Her and Peter have real chemistry, probably because these two actors got together later on.
That changing like the snake, I might be free to cast off flesh wherein I dwell confined. Would you give it all up? After all you know you can do, all the power you feel.
So we can now add Dr. Connors to all of the other split personality goleming type of villains that these movies insist on putting in all the time. Surprisingly though, Michael Fassbender was originally supposed to be Dr. Connors, but he passed so that he could play Magneto in X-Men First Class. Probably a good move, Fassbender. It was also rumoured that Christoph Waltz from Inglourious Basterds was going to play Dr. Connors, and I have to admit, I'd kind of be intrigued to see what kind of performance he'd give. But of course, the biggest plot hole in the final ending is the lizard's grand plan is to shoot out all this goo and turn the whole city into lizards because he thinks he's gonna take all of the human species up a step in the evolutionary ladder. And by all of humanity, I mean whatever couple of thousands of people were within the radius of that gas cloud. And by taking them a step up the evolutionary ladder, I mean at least for a couple of hours until all the gas weared off. Yeah. Seriously, there's not even a scene earlier on where Dr. Connors is like, oh, I figured out a way to crack the serum to make it permanent now. Like, that would actually add some tension to the ending there, but he doesn't. So who cares if people turn into lizards? Everyone would just be like, hey, remember that time when we turned into lizards for a few hours? That was weird. Oh well. And yes, as many people pointed out, this ending is identical to that of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Shredder's plan to spread the mutagen over New York is exactly the same as the Lizard's plan. It's really amazing they didn't get sued, and it's even more amazing that they decided to steal that story. Out of all the plots of all the different movies that you could have stole from, you chose that? I don't get it. But hey, once again, it's Sony. A noteworthy change to the parameters of the story though, is in the comic books, Captain George Stacy is actually a strong ally, a strong supporter of Spider-Man, and it's Gwen Stacy who ends up hating Spider-Man because she blames him for the death of her father. They swapped it around the other way in the movies where the father doesn't accept him, but Gwen Stacy's like, yeah, Spider-Man. Probably because if they had done it the way it was in the comics, it just would have been the Green Goblin storyline all over again. And again, this a-hole version of Peter Parker does the same kind of thing to Gwen at the end of the movie that he does to Aunt May earlier in the movie. Just as he paid no attention whatsoever to Aunt May's grief over her husband's death, he also pays no attention whatsoever to Gwen Stacy's grief over her father's death. Now, of course, we all know that this is because the father, in his dying breath, tells him to stay away from Gwen. He doesn't want her drawn into this vigilante superhero world. But as many people have pointed out, why doesn't Peter Parker just tell her that? She already knows that he's Spider-Man, and she knows that her father knew that he was Spider-Man at the time he died. So I don't see what the problem is. Why can't you just tell her he didn't want me to be around you because he knew I'd live a dangerous life as a vigilante. He didn't want you as a part of that. He didn't even go to the funeral. Like, go to the funeral, support her through that difficult time, and then say, your dad didn't want me around. She even actually guesses it at the end, and he still doesn't confirm it.
You made you promise, didn't he? To stay away from me, so I'd be safe.
Say something, dude. Why are you just letting her suffer like this? That's such a dick move. And he continues to act like a dick in the next movie as well. But we'll get to that. So guys, we've still got Alien Resurrection and Amazing Spider-Man 2 in this mega review series to do. I am going to save both of them though until the week just before Spider-Man Homecoming and Alien Covenant comes out, which means we've got sort of room to start new videos. I do want to leave next week's video kind of blank just for the time being, because there's a couple of different things I want to shuffle around based off what's going to be released. So we'll just leave next week's as a bit of a surprise for the moment. So, The Amazing Spider-Man gets quite a bit of unjustified hate, I think. And yes, fair criticism for certain things that aren't that great. But ultimately, I think the good stuff does outweigh the bad stuff. But Amazing Spider-Man 2, that's a very different case. So if you want to check out more videos from me, you can click on any of the stuff you see right here. I am Bandit, this is Bandit Incorporated, and until next time, I will see you guys in the comments.